The Australian Financial Review.
Hello, I'm James Thomson, Senior Chanticleer columnist at the AFR. Welcome to our weekly news breakdown of all things business, finance and markets. With me today, as always, it's my Chanticleer colleague, the hero who always eats the Turkish delight Easter eggs. It's Anthony Macdonald. How are you, Anthony?
I'll eat them only if the cherry ripe ones are gone, James.
Fair enough. Well, this week we zoom out and try to pull together the threads behind an incredible first quarter of the year. We predict the big headlines you'll be reading in the coming months, and we explain why Australia's healthcare sector looks pretty sick. Anthony, let's start there. On Monday, the AFR hosted its second annual healthcare summit, and it's a fascinating time for the sector. I mean, on the surface, the setup looks pretty good. We're all getting older and sicker in this country, and yet our private hospitals are struggling. Just look at the collapse of Healthscope last year. Complaints about private health insurance are through the roof, and the share market darling of the healthcare sector, CSL, is in the doghouse. What did you learn on Monday, Anthony?
Healthcare is so unique, James. It's probably the most unique sector that we cover, I reckon, from a summit. It's a bit like energy, but it's different again. Like, it's all about government policy. And government policy is all about cost and health outcomes. Yeah, and the politicians are much more interested in things like surgery wait times, the number of surgeons that get through the College of Physicians, the politics of it all than they are, cost of capital, return on investment, or even attracting investment in general, which is, stuff that we're normally thinking about. And it's funny, outside of the investor panel, no one really spoke about the investment side of things. No one really spoke about money going into the sector. It's all just how to direct around the public purse. I learned a few things. There's substantial tension between the healthcare system and the NDIS.
Right.
Nick Coatsworth, who listeners might remember was the Deputy Chief Medical Officer during COVID, silverhead guy, glasses. Yeah. He got an impromptu round of applause for pointing out just how much money the NDIS soaks up and how few recipients there really are. He said, if you think about it, the top 5 calls on the budget, are health, aged care, interest costs, defence, and the NDIS.
Yep.
4 of them, in his words, benefit all 26 million Australians, while one of them, the NDIS, benefits only 800,000 recipients. And that got an applause. Now, I'm not sure I agree with his analysis entirely, but I think the fact that he says that, the room applauds, the healthcare sector applauds, shows that these bleeding hearts in the healthcare sector, people you think would be bleeding hearts, they're actually quite concerned about money that's going into the NDIS and maybe away from the public hospital system. So there is that tension there. The second thing I learnt, James, GLP-1s, hot topic, the weight loss drugs.
This is the Ozempics and the Monjuros and all that sort of stuff.
Exactly, yeah. So, Mark Butler, the health minister, even he's talking about GLP-1s, and there's a big gulf in what people think these weight loss drugs can do. Butler's cautious. He pointed to a study that showed, GLP-1s can be very effective in helping people lose weight relatively quickly, but then that weight can go back on pretty quickly as well when people come off it. And they're not necessarily drugs that people can afford. They can't afford to stay on them for the long term, or the doctors aren't prescribing them to people for the long term. And then he's also thinking about where they're used and how they'd be used. So he points out that obesity is much more prevalent in low socioeconomic areas, where if you look at where these drugs are being used at the moment, tend to be in richer areas. He's kicking all that around his brain, but at the moment they're funded for patients that are both obese and have heart conditions, normally, if they've had something like a heart attack. So they're kind of used as a fix-up job
a reactive
after that.
measure.
Yeah, when other people in the industry be saying, no, this is actually a prevention tool. They should be funded for people before they have the heart attack, right?
Gotcha, yeah.
And that's where they'd be most effective. So there's that sort of tension in the sector too. And thirdly, and most depressingly, for the hardcore Chanticleer listeners out there, James, the ones that enjoy the free markets and love cheering for Australia and love the idea of the next big thing, the next CSL, the next Cochlear or whatever, the next RedMed. It sounds like if Australia has one of these companies again, it's going to have to move offshore, get funded offshore, and Australia's sort of venture capital system, even superannuation system, isn't big enough or willing enough to back these sorts of companies and get them funded in Australia and allow them to then become global champions. It sounds like the ideas might come from Australia, but they're going to have to move offshore much sooner and do a lot of the development work, which is quite expensive. do it offshore using offshore money because Australians just aren't as interested in backing this stuff. That's kind of sad in a way. You know,
absolutely.
like we've got limited money here. We've got to determine what we spend it on. The big problem is the superannuation funds, the way the system's set up now, James, they're much more interested in buying Commonwealth Bank shares or BHP shares and making their, 8 or 9, 10% a year return rather than going for the moonshots. And I think as superannuants, James, yourself, me, everyone out there,
everyone else,
we need to have a look at ourselves in the mirror as well here and wonder if we're also, become a bit complacent and, we just want those sort of like smooth returns backing big businesses that we know rather than, trying to create the next big thing. Because, if you give, no offense to you, James, if you give your, extra $10 to BHP,
yes,
what's it going to do with it?
Yeah,
really?
Yeah.
How's it going to change anything for BHP? But if that $10 goes to, something that could be the next ResMed or Cochlear or CSL, that could end up being, $20 billion business with 20,000 employees. And I'm not saying all our money should be directed there. That's a little bit sad.
Well, BHP would probably give me my $10 back in dividends and share buybacks over the next few years. I mean, that's a really good point. And it's a fascinating time for health, isn't it? I mean, the cost of health's only going up, the importance of health's only going up, but it does feel a bit like the sector's in a strange place. The economics of the healthcare sector are really being stretched and tested, as I guess they always are, but this challenge is only going to get harder as we get sicker and older, isn't it?
They will.
All right, Anthony, we're going to talk a lot about Iran in a second as we break down the big stories of the year so far. But the war's rolled into a fifth week. The impact on the local economy and the financial markets is dominating everything. So before we zoom out, can you please zoom in and just bring us up to date with the latest developments in the war?
Yeah, it's definitely the story of the first quarter, James. We've got Donald Trump now trying to wrap this thing up relatively quickly. Iran definitely seems keen to talk, although there's some consternation about exactly who it's talking with. Is it the US directly? Is it another country like Pakistan or China? Who are the individuals doing the talking? It's all a bit of a mystery. But Trump's telling Americans about a 2 or 3 week timetable for ending the war, while Iran's president wrote a letter to Trump's Americans, those same people, saying your country started this and we harbour no enmity towards you or your country. Now, I had to look up enmity. That means no hostile feelings. I think it's a word from the Bible, quite an old word, very Middle East.
Right.
But meanwhile, Trump even suggested on Thursday that Iran had requested a ceasefire, albeit Iran's foreign ministry said that's BS. Like, no way. We haven't. The Strait of Hormuz is still effectively closed and under Iran's control. Trump said this week it was up to other countries to sort that out, albeit sort of backtrack a little bit on that, and it's clearly a sticking point. So the week ends with Trump and his regime still miffed at Europe for not helping the US and Israel out on this, particularly for not helping them in the Strait of Hormuz. And he started talking about pulling out of NATO again.
Right.
So there's a lot going on, and that NATO comment in particular shows there could be ramifications far beyond the Middle East. But back home in Australia, Anthony Albanese made a rare address to Australians on Wednesday night, basically saying, go easy on the fuel if you can. Our problem is fuel supply, the cost of fuel and other oil-related products. That will last for months, he says. Meanwhile, there's talk of fuel restrictions post-Easter. But James, part of shielding us from the worst of it and looking after our dwindling supplies is cutting the fuel excise to make fuel more affordable. That's a joke, isn't it? Unless it's matched by some demand-curbing measures.
It's possibly not a joke for Anthony Albanese. He got exactly what he wanted out of this. Front pages everywhere, fuel excise down, fuel taxes cut, relief for motorists. Is exactly the political and populist response that the government would have been looking for. But you just got to wonder about this one. We're in this period now where the buffers in the energy system are completely eroded. All around the world, we're talking about the need to reduce demand and get demand back in sync with, much lower supply. And here we are in Australia with a tax measure that really either helps improve demand or at least keeps it at the same level. I mean, I think it's just really weird. I contrast this decision with a decision made in Victoria last weekend, which was to make public transport free for a month. Now, we don't often praise the Victorian government's policy making in the Financial Review, but this looked eminently sensible. You're trying to reduce demand for fuel by shifting as many people onto public transport as possible. You're trying to keep the economy going. You're trying to keep people going into the city and heading into their workplaces rather than working from home so that economic activity holds up. I mean, that's a good response. Now, there is a cost to these free public transport programs. I think the Victorian government's one is costing 50 mil for a month. The New South Wales government has suggested it would cost 150 million for a month. So that's got to be taken into account too. But we're going to be spending money on cost of living subsidies. Maybe this is the right one to spend on. I just wonder about this fuel excise. It's easy populism. Is it the right call? I don't know. I guess the one thing, Anthony, is that we did see this once before where the fuel excise was used in 2022 as a temporary measure. So the government does have the ability to bring it in and phase it out, which I guess means it can be used as a short-term tool.
This one does my head in. We talk about Anthony Albanese, as Mr. Save the Day. I'd say he's Mr. Cost the next generation more. If you stop collecting that 26 cents a litre on fuel in the short term, that's $2.55 billion that doesn't make its way into the government coffers. And how's that going to be funded? I mean, if we match this with some sort of cost cuts in the budget, yeah, sure. Because we're zooming towards $1.1 trillion in debt. We're only a year or two away from that. This thing is only going to be funded with more government debt. Like, seriously, what are we doing? We are stoking a fire here by cutting the fuel costs at a time we're trying to slow the rest of the economy. And this is the federal government working against exactly what the RBA is trying to do. So you got fiscal policy up against monetary policy. And it's absolutely doing my head in.
Well, I mean, this is the world we're in, where we are in a world of perpetual crises. And I think that's a good segue for our first big topic. I think we'd all agree that the Easter break comes at a pretty perfect time this year because it's been a hell of a first quarter. Yes, we're all talking about Iran right now, and rightly so, but here's just a little list of some of the news events since the calendar turned to January. On January 3, the US attacked Venezuela, capturing the president Nicolas Maduro. On January 8, Iran launched a brutal crackdown against widespread protests against the government. Also on January 8, Rio Tinto and Glencore announced a $300 billion merger that would eventually be abandoned. On January 19, we had the Davos Talk Fest, where Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney declared the old rules-based order of the Western world was over. On January 30, 3 million pages of the Epstein files were released. On January 31, silver joined gold in a crazy rally, looking back at it. February 3, the RBA raised rates. February 4, the sell-off in software stocks began and would eventually turn into the SaaSpocalypse. On February 20, the US Supreme Court ruled Donald Trump's tariffs were illegal. On February 25, WiseTech cut 2,000 jobs due to AI, and Block and Atlassian followed shortly after. On February 28, of course, the US and Israel began the war against Iran. March 17, the RBA raised rates again. March 21, Labor won the South Australian election in a landslide. But the big story, of course, was One Nation's surging share of the vote. And on March 26, private credit's rolling crisis expanded again with more big-name funds restricting redemptions. Anthony, that's just an edited list I came up with, which shows you what a bonkers year it's been so far. It's a tough call, but can you pick one or two of those events that are not Iran and talk to us about how they'll cast a long shadow when we look back in, 2 or 3 years' time?
Just one or two?
Yeah, just one or two. That's all.
Well, first off, I know this doesn't make your job any easier, James, but I think you missed a couple.
Yeah, okay.
January 5, BlueScope reveals a $14 billion bid from Australia's SGH and US steelmaker Steel Dynamics.
Yes, good
Big
point.
deal. Technically still got a pulse, but the two sides are still apart on value. February 10, CSL CEO Paul McKenzie retires, effective that day. We've had other big CEO changes announced at BHP, Woodside, Lendlease, ASX, Corporate Travel,
Yep.
BlueScope itself. There's plenty going around. So, yeah, there's been a lot going on. If I have to just pick two, I'll go with the AI job cuts. With the economy likely softening and AI use rising, I think corporate Australia will take the chance to reset cost bases and staff numbers this year with a round of AI job cuts. The software companies have already started it. Like you said, WiseTech, Atlassian, Block. Atlassian, to me, that's the big one. That's the one that's got a big impact on corporate Australia. This is the company that used to go into boards of corporates all the time and give them, advice on how to be a bit more agile and tech-like and innovative and a bit more like a startup. If Atlassian's doing it, I think it's a bit of a precedent for even old world corporates to be like, all right, we're coming under pressure. The economy's not growing like it used to. The RBA is raising rates. We're a bit worried about earnings growth. How are we going to do it? Revenue's going to be hard to grow, so let's cut costs. How do you cut costs? Chop some staff. And how do you justify it? You say, all right, well, AI is making our business more efficient, so we do it that way. So I think that one, to me, really catches my eye. The second one, James, is the hard one. I'm staying in Australia, though, and I'm going with One Nation. Yeah. And just to be clear, I think some of the things on that list could have much more lasting impacts, particularly on the global economy. I don't think One Nation changes that too much. But I just can't go past choosing the rise of One Nation as something that everyday Australians should be thinking about. Like, it's an absolute blight on the coalition, the Liberal Party in particular, that we're even talking about this. Like, they've lost so many seats in the past 2 elections. They're looking pretty unelectable for the rest of this decade. I'd say they're probably more chance of losing another 7 or 8 seats and becoming irrelevant than they are winning the next election. You know, in the meantime, One Nation's just really got a head of steam behind it and picking up some of that base. And we saw at the South Australia election, One Nation got 22.4% of the primary vote, right? Passing the Liberals, who got 19.4%. So One Nation won 4 seats in the lower house. It was the first time the party had won lower house seats outside of Queensland. Yeah. It's got 3 of the 11 contested seats in the upper house. So they did best in regional areas, which probably not a surprise. But to relegate the Liberal Party to number 3, I mean, that's no mean feat.
Yeah.
And you've got to wonder, is this just a moment in time? Is this reflective of pushback against a party that had a terrible 2025 election campaign, a terrible 2025 election result, or is it something more? And I think the problem for the Liberal Party is we're seeing the vote splinter between the city sort of living moderates who are voting Teal and the more conservative hardline Liberals who are voting One Nation now. What's left, I think, is a pretty confused party, a pretty confused voter base, and a pretty sort of interesting time in Australian politics where we might be seeing a serious changing of the guard, but we'll only know, I guess, with the passage of time, like all these things. So we're wondering if it was just a moment in time. South Australian election sort of shows that it's not just people's intentions. They actually will vote this way. They actually will vote for One Nation. But yeah, like, long list, lots happened. What are your 1 or 2, James?
Oh, look, I think you've hit the nail on the head, actually. I think the AI job cuts is a big moment. I think that the changing tides of politics is another one. It's definitely a lot about the Liberal Party, but I think this is more about a shift towards populism and polarisation generally that we're seeing around the world. So I think you've nailed it, Anthony. But yeah, it's sort of all about Iran all the time. But I think it's just remarkable to think about how the narrative in markets and the world has changed over the course of just 3 months. It feels crazy.
Now, James, you've got this great habit of sort of zooming out and thinking about how all these frantic events can be tied together. You're a bit like Russell Crowe in A Beautiful Mind, trying to come up with a unified theory of the world. Or maybe it's more like a conspiracy theorist in a tinfoil hat with a chalkboard with newspaper clippings connected with a red string. I'm not sure. I'd love to see inside that study of yours one day. But can you try and frame all this up for us? Keep it to, say, half an hour if you can.
Half an hour, Anthony. I'll need a lot longer than that. I think this is a 4-part Splinter podcast, and I appreciate the comparison to Russell Crowe whenever I can get it. But look, I think there's 3 big forces coming together: polarisation, financialisation, and of course technology. I sort of think back to the late 1980s and the late 1990s when that sort of big era of globalisation begins and world trade picks up. Western nations, they outsource a lot of manufacturing and other services to low-cost countries. That all looks pretty good for a while. It helps fuel economic growth. It helps fuel improvement in living standards, and inflation's generally low, which is really important. So we see interest rates fall. And as interest rates fall, that unleashes this wave of financialisation. Because money's cheap, you can do lots with it, and there's lots of it to go around. Markets open up and become more global. Just to put some numbers around it, the cloud of finance, as you might call it, that includes markets and debt and all that sort of stuff, it's now about somewhere between 6 and 10 times the size of the actual economy, the actual global economy. So this cloud of finance becomes really important to the way the world works. And yeah, okay, there are some bad moments, especially the GFC, but generally asset prices go up. And even those bad moments like the GFC or the pandemic, they result in economies being flooded with even more money, which helps asset prices go up further. And I guess that private credit boom that we've seen sort of start to unravel a little bit is a result of that cloud of finance coming through. There's so much cheap and abundant capital being put to work that it finds its way into all parts of the economy. And of course, cheap money also drives technology revolutions. Think of the last, 25 years. It's no coincidence that this expansion in financialisation occurs at the same time as the internet boom and then the social media boom and now the AI boom. But I think what we're seeing in this first 3 months of the year is all this stuff colliding. Financialisation might have pushed up asset prices, but that's also inflamed inequality because people are being left behind. Of course, inequality leads to polarisations of electorates. Polarisations of electorates lead to populist leaders who do populist things that are often inflationary. And one of those examples is, of course, going to war. And so we get higher inflation, which means higher interest rates, which means we get cracks in private credit. And at the same time, we've got this big tech revolution coming through, funded by that abundant capital, that could change the way we, work and live and play and all that sort of stuff. But it could also further inflame inequality, polarisation and populism. So that's all played out in the last 3 months, and it feels like we've got this world where everything's happening all the time and all these things are suddenly colliding. But I guess my argument would be that these forces have been building for decades, and what we've seen in this 3 months, this sort of period of rolling crises, it's probably the world we're going to be living in for definitely the next 3 years. Will it be the next 30 years? Maybe. I'm not sure. It's hard to see 30 minutes in front of you in financial markets at the moment. But big theories are great, Anthony. They won't put fuel in the car or heat my house as the cold Melbourne winter approaches. At the moment, is the Strait of Hormuz all that really matters for, at least the next 6 months and perhaps the next year?
First, let me say, well explained, Russell. Really good work there. I think we're all going to be 10% smarter listening to that synopsis. Is the Strait of Hormuz all that really matters in the near term? And it's not all that matters. I mean, life and death's the biggest story in the world. Anything that is going to involve life and death, your floods, bushfires, all that sort of stuff really will locally, domestically, will knock it off the agenda. But until then, it's all that really matters. It's heavily influential. I mean, the way that the fuel prices have gone up, it's a product that a lot of us use every day. Yeah. You're at the Bowser every week or every second week, maybe even every day for some people. So it is heavily influential. We saw back in the post-COVID era that nothing can sort of dominate the political agenda like a cost of living crisis. And with rates going up, inflation still high, fuel gone through the roof, this smacks of heading into cost of living type conditions again. Yeah. To your point there about the populist politics, we've seen affordability pop onto the radar in the US again, and that's getting a lot of airtime over there. So I think it will dictate what happens in the near term, Strait of Hormuz. The petrol prices are going to be heavily influential. But in the background, everyone's going to keep doing their own little thing. Every industry is going to be trying to push their own little cause. All that stuff still happens. It just doesn't necessarily get the attention or the urgency that it really needs. So the big danger for Australia is that we just get caught up thinking about fuel prices and what this extra $12 a tank means for me right now, rather than what's actually happening for the longer term, what the lives of our kids are going to look like, what the lives of our grandkids are going to look like, what's happening with, property prices and jobs and AI and all that stuff. I really hope we don't take our eye off the ball.
Yeah.
But James, it is Easter. It's a time of resurrection and new life. What's the story of hope in all this?
Yeah, that's a tough one for a bear. I think I'd go back to the first topic we talked about, which was healthcare. Yeah, okay, the healthcare sector's difficult, not easy to get an Australian healthcare giant going. But if you think about this AI boom, the potential for AI to drive some really big jumps in drug discovery, medical treatments, it's got to be there. We can get very focused on the negatives from AI, and I think we're right to be worried about them. But I just hope maybe we're not that far from the AI medical breakthrough that would sort of make everyone say, this AI stuff's not too bad in many ways. So, look, that's my story of hope. Things can change fairly quickly. You talked about those GLP-1 drugs and the incredible impact they've had in a very short space of time. Maybe the AI version of GLP-1 drugs is not too far around the corner. But Anthony, I reckon that's enough looking backwards. Shall we have a look forward?
Good call, James. Time for an impossible task. I want us both to come up with 3 headlines that our listeners will read in the AFR in the coming months. These will capture the big trends, the big stories that we're going to be talking about for the rest of the year. Take us away, James.
All right, this is a headline you'll be reading, I reckon, in the next 3 months. Or I hope you will be. Peace deal lets oil flow again. Yes, clearly Donald Trump tells us we're on the cusp of a deal every 5 minutes. I think the economic pain that this war has created is getting to the point where all sides and all countries have a huge incentive to do something to end it. I don't know what that end looks like. I'm not sure if it'll be a peace deal or whether there's some other way that the Strait of Hormuz gets opened. An uneasy peace maybe as different militaries go in and help escort tankers through. I don't know, but I think we are reaching that critical pain point for everybody where Iran, the US, and most other countries have a big incentive for this thing to be over. So I'm hoping logic will prevail, Anthony. What's your first headline?
Unemployment hits 5-year high. RBA told to go easier on inflation.
Oof.
Yeah, unemployment's been less than 5% since November 2021. You might remember it spiked in COVID. Very unusually, it got into the mid-7s. That's rare for Australia. Came back into the 6s and the 5s as the economy reopened. Then the job market got incredibly tight. So from November 2021, dropped below 5%, and then it just kept dropping. Got to 3.4%. It was a red-hot jobs market. That's back when we were talking about things like garbage collector, clean away, trying to hire hairdressers to drive garbage trucks, right? It was a time like we'd not really seen in the past 20 years. So currently the unemployment rate is at 4.3%. The participation rate, which measures the people out there trying to get jobs, willing and able to work, that's at near record levels. So to me, that shows there's a lot of people out there that are looking for work because they feel like they have to. These might be one-income families where they've sent the second person out to try and get an income. There might be people that are semi-retired that were hoping to scrape through till they got to 67 and the pension age. And they might be like, oh, it's getting a bit tight. Look at fuel prices. I'm going to have to go out and get a job. So it feels like to me, the RBA is raising rates to try and get on top of inflation again. It's putting the brakes on the economy. That should cool the jobs market, something that didn't happen too much in the last rate cycle, which is only a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Albeit, there were still job shortages at the time. It was all very disrupted because of COVID. So, the economists and the market's expecting another 2 or 3 rate rises this year. They're cooling the economy even more. I think the whole soft landing thing we went through last time, James, it always felt like it was a bit of a furphy. Now it really feels like it was a bit of a furphy that we might actually need unemployment to go up to really slow the economy, to smack the inflation once and for all. And I just feel like we're headed in that direction.
Yeah, no question. There's no narrow path this time. Something's got to give to get inflation down sustainably, and it has to be the jobs market. So I think you're right there, Anthony.
What's your second?
Big bank AI revolution begins. I think at some stage this year, we're going to see one of the big banks make a big call on AI and start to deploy it at scale with resultant job losses. I think the big banks are under pressure. While their share prices have gone well, there's not much earnings growth in the banking sector, and the economics are tough. I think we're going to start to see big banks forced to take bigger action on costs. AI gives them a way to do that and or some cover to do that. I think once one of the banks goes, all of the banks will follow. So I think they're approaching this relatively cautiously, but I have a suspicion that in the back half of the year, we'll see one of the big banks make a big announcement around this and sell it as a pivot into an AI future or something like that. Anthony, what about you?
Hybrids and EVs outsell fuel guzzlers for the first time.
Oh.
Yeah, I love the monthly car stats, James. I just can't help it. But I think, just generally, I think it's going to be a tough time for new car sales. Links to the economy before. New car sales are down 2.7% in February. It's got harder. But for January and February, all the non-fuel cars, they're both types of hybrids, the EVs, they accounted for 32% of sales across those 2 months. That's a lot. That's way more than it's ever been. It's fueled by government policy. It's fueled by these new models of cars, perhaps better technology, us just getting more comfortable, I think, with hybrids and EVs in general. So it was 32% of sales for the first 2 months. Think about what's happened since, right? The Iran war, oil price shocks, has to drive more people towards these more fuel-efficient options. Like, it just has to.
Yeah.
Petrol, $2.50 a litre, diesel at $3. People are going to be looking for alternatives. So either we get Holden to bring back the Barina or dealers sell more EVs and hybrids. And I think I know which way it's heading.
All right, my final one is Trump trounced in midterm elections, claims victory anyway. Donald Trump's approval ratings are absolutely in the toilet, Anthony.
Terrible.
They are shocking, particularly on any measures around the economy. That's another reason why he has to find an off-ramp for this war, and quickly. I think that the die is cast for the midterm elections, which are in across October and November. The Democrats are going to wipe the floor here. I think it's going to be very hard for the Republicans to turn that around. But Trump being Trump, he'll find some way to say it was all rigged, or there's a problem with the voting system, or whatever it is. That'll make the midterm elections a sort of double story of Trump being beaten up pretty badly, but also trying to have his cake and eat it too. What's your last one?
Big tech holds Australia's energy transition hostage.
Ooh.
I'm looking forward to writing this one, James. I must admit, the big tech companies, the AI and the cloud services companies, they want to come here. They want to build their data centers here, or at least rent them here. They've got these large language models. They take a huge amount of data, a huge amount of power. They're mostly in the US at the moment, but even the friendly states in the US, like Texas, they're either running out of power or there's community pushback, so they're having to look elsewhere. And they want to come to Australia. There's lots of reasons why Australia, in theory, is good to host their data centers, but they want help to be able to do it. So they either want clarity on the tax system and how much tax they'd have to pay, clarity as they call it, not breaks, clarity.
Yeah.
And they want help with Australia's copyright laws so they can feed their models Australian data and not breach copyright laws. So there's plenty of talks in the background. We've got Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei in Australia this week, but talks only get you so far. You know, they've been threatening to bankroll the energy transition for a while and shore up their social benefit to Australia. Like, they're saying that if they can come here with their data centers, they'll basically transition the grid for us. You know, which is fine. That sort of talk's great. But I think they actually have to jump in first and do it. So I reckon we could see one or two of them just like underwrite a massive new renewables project, like something that would be an absolute game changer, something that we could see Eraring taken offline here in New South Wales, for example, James. But they'll do it with strings attached, right? They'll do it only if they get that tax clarity, only if they get that copyright laws changes, and they'll really try and bring this to a head, right? They'll put the pressure on the government and say, all right, here's our offer. It's firm, binding, all that sort of stuff. What's your offer?
Yeah, interesting.
Right? And then Australia's going to have to decide once and for all, do we want to be in this AI tokens game? Do we want to try and be a, AI tokens exporter, powerhouse in the Asia Pacific or not? Is there promise to green up the grid with reliable, renewable power actually worth it? Is it real? Or should we just tell them to pack their bags and go somewhere else?
All right, Anthony, let me ask you a different type of question then. Is there a headline that you don't think we'll read, that you think we should? Something that should be happening in the world that we should be focused on, or somewhere that, is just not going to get the attention it deserves?
Government attacks debt and deficit for the good of all Australians?
Well, that was going to be mine, so I'm not sure what to say now. This whole thing we've been talking about for ages about the May budget being a cornucopia of reform and productivity growing initiatives, forget about it. All done and dusted. It's going to be very much a wartime budget, I think. So something not to look forward to there. Well, Anthony, great list of headlines. All I can say is it's going to be another massive few months ahead. We'll come back after the break and take another question on AI. Back in a second. Well, welcome back. If you want to know more about what we're talking about today and a whole lot more, AFR subscribers can sign up to the Chanticleer newsletter at join.afr.com/Chanticleer. Every Saturday, the newsletter pulls together the best Chanticleer columns from the week and delivers them straight to your inbox. Okay, Anthony, a short week ahead and a quiet one, but it does start very late on Good Friday with US job numbers, which will come out with the US market shut, which I guess is maybe a good thing if the job numbers are a bit rough. We'll see where that goes. those. Interesting on Tuesday, though, we get all these things called the PMIs, which are the Purchasing Managers Indexes, which tell us how global manufacturing is holding up. Anthony, I reckon this is really going to be interesting to see next Tuesday how the sentiment is in global manufacturing with everything going on in the Middle East.
You're right, James. Economists are cutting those global growth forecasts. It's something, a live thing because of the Iran war, because of the inflation pressures, the oil price, all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, you're right. Let's see what the manufacturing sector is ordering.
Yeah, absolutely. And most importantly, Anthony, of course, is the Easter break for a well-earned rest for everyone over the next couple of days, which is really important. Well, we love questions here at the Chanticleer HQ. So if you've got a question you want to send in, you can email us at chanticleer@afr.com like Tash did today. You'll find the link in our show notes. Or send us a question in audio form. Just record a voice memo and email it through. There's also a widget on the bottom of every Chanticleer article at afr.com, so you can also send us a question that way. Let's ask our producer Mandy to do the honours with Tasha's question.
Hi Chooks, love the podcast. It's a good way to end the weekly commute. My question is about AI. AI is primarily an investment in infrastructure in the form of the massive data centres that are powering the models. Previous tech innovation that involved infrastructure construction left a legacy. For example, fibre optic cabling, even if the early movers didn't survive. My question is that since AI is dependent on chips that only have a lifespan of 3 to 5 years, doesn't that mean that instead of long-term infrastructure development, these companies are actually building something that is going to require expensive and extensive maintenance? Does this mean that they have a time pressure to become profitable rather than the slow addicted and then make you subscribe model common with tech companies? For those companies with alternate revenue streams, what will happen if AI capex doesn't convert to returns and becomes a drag on otherwise healthy businesses?
That's a great question, Tash. I hope she's commuting via rail.
That's what I was thinking.
In these times of tight fuel supplies. But I asked some analysts from JP Morgan who held a data center press conference this very question around the use-by date on chips. And there is this view among some people that, the chips are being updated so often that they may only last 3 to 5 years. The view in the sector is that actually chips can last a lot longer than that. The chips themselves have a software layer on top of them. The software can be continuously updated. And, there's still chips whirring around at the moment that were built 10 to 15 years ago. So perhaps there is a way to get a lot longer out of the chips. I think that's the optimistic view, Anthony. The more pessimistic / realistic view is AI is moving so quickly, the chips are moving so quickly. Everyone's going to want the latest and greatest thing to pump these tokens out in the most energy efficient and fastest way possible, aren't they?
The truth is we just don't know. This is all new, right? The technology's rolling out. NVIDIA's doing it at the moment. There's other chip makers that are developing their own that are supposed to be coming out pretty soon. But absolutely, like Tash is right. Like there's two bits to the data centers. There's the building, right? And they're very expensive buildings, big, fit out Bunnings shed or Kennard self-storage if it isn't a data center.
Yep.
But it's going to have huge power infrastructure behind it. So they are purpose-built data centers. So I think if nothing else, we'll end up with these nice buildings with huge power allocations. Yeah. But the biggest cost of the data center, about 5 times the cost of building it, 6 times, 7 times even, is the chips. As you just pointed out, those chips, they have a shorter life than the sheds. Even if they last, say, 10 years, right? If the cooling technology is that good, if the software layer is that good, if they don't burn through the chips as much as they might, they're still going to require replacement more often than the buildings. And that's billions and billions and billions of dollars of capital expenditure. Someone's going to have to pay that. In the old world, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, they'd turn up, they'd bring their own chips and they'd be paying for it. In the new world, where you got these neoclouds like Firmus, they buy the chips. But the bottom line is, none of this stuff's for free. As consumers of AI products, we'll all be paying for it. It's got to come through somewhere. These companies are not coming from the good of their heart. They want to make a profit, and there's danger for all of us, business, households, everyone, that we just get so reliant on these products. We're just paying for them forever.
Yeah. I think you just hit on something that's really important, Anthony. When I think about the sort of everything that's happening in the world at the moment, it feels like what's happening in Iran is sort of unknowable in terms of the immediate, how it rolls out. But eventually, logic says that there has to be some sort of resolution. The Strait of Hormuz has to be reopened. The war will end. That's what history tells us. It's totally different with AI. I think that's my sort of big takeaway from this 3 months. we just don't know where this steam train's going. It's rushing down the tracks. No one's really sure of the return that a data center ultimately earns. No one's entirely sure how the chips work. No one's got any real idea of how AI adoption rolls out through the economy. In some ways, that's really exciting. In some ways, it's completely interesting. In some ways, it's a little bit terrifying, but we're such at an early stage with all this, and it's going to be fascinating to watch where it all goes.
There's Russell Crowe again.
Yeah, fair point. All right, Anthony, I'm going to give my Russell Crowe head a bit of a break. I hope you have a terrific break as well with your family.
Thanks, you too, James. Happy Easter. And you know I like the cherry ripe eggs. What do you hope the Easter Bunny brings on Easter Sunday?
Oh, well, I am very partial to a milk chocolate Lindt bunny.
Really?
How much do you reckon one of those is going for at the moment?
I don't know. How much?
$13. Holy smokes. You can fill up a quarter of your tank of petrol for that now. So, look, I'll be happy with a little bit of downtime, and we hope all our listeners out there have a great break too.
Yeah, you've got a week off as well, James. Enjoy your week off. Richly deserved. We'll catch you when you get back.
Thanks, Anthony. We'll see you next week. Thanks for listening. If you like the podcast, send it to a friend as it helps other listeners find us. And don't forget to follow wherever you get your podcasts so you'll never miss an episode. At The Financial Review, we investigate the big stories about markets, business and power. For more, go to afr.com and you can subscribe to The Financial Review, the daily habit of successful people. Chanticleer was hosted by me, James Thomson and Anthony Macdonald. It was produced by Mandy Coolin and our theme is by Alex Gow. Head of audio is Alex Gow and head of premium content is Fiona Buffini.
The Australian Financial Review.